Part 3 of the Shergold and Weir report. Hello everyone, welcome back to part 3 of the report and the role of the private building surveyor. So, contemporary building and construction law derive from the 1991 Model Building Act, the MB Act, elements of which have since been variously adopted by the states and territories. A number of major reforms were embodied in the MB Act, including providing a choice of either engaging a private building surveyor to certify all aspects of construction requiring approval, including the issue of an occupancy certificate, or to opt for the traditional route in which approval was facilitated by the local authority. Mandating professional indemnity cover for prescribed classes of building practitioners such as engineers, architects, and surveyors. Providing for the setting of minimum qualifications for building practitioners. Providing certainty in respect of time limitations for lawsuits. Requiring judges to apportion liability for damages so that a party found liable for a given proportion of the total amount of damages for economic loss and rectification cost resulting from the defective works would need to pay no more than the given proportion, and providing for one-stop shops for resolving building approval disagreements. For liability reasons, the model proposed did not have a role for local government if the private surveyor was engaged, other than to perform a document registry function. In 4 jurisdictions, including 3 with the highest volume of building and construction work, this model has been adopted. In the other 4 jurisdictions, variations on this model have been adopted. In each case, the private building surveyors have a certification role, and either the local or territory government can accept their certification without the need to form their own opinion or take on any liability for the work of the private building surveyor. In short, in all jurisdictions across Australia, private certification now occurs as part of the vast majority of building approval process. Yep. Frankly, I'd be surprised if the councils even have them employed anymore in some areas. The increase in private certification has resulted in a significant decline in the resources and capacity of most local government building authorities. Well, exactly. A building regulatory model that includes private certification carries with it an inherent potential for conflict of interest, as I've been saying. That is not to say that a model where only a government official certifies building design and construction is entirely free from potential conflict of interest. Yes, but I think it's much more, there's greater potential for it removing it from the government. There's evidence that government processes can be open to poor practices. However, the private certification model will always have a significant potential for conflict of interest given the commercial relationship that must necessarily exist between the designer builder and building surveyor. Even if the building surveyor is appointed by the owner, this appointment will be influenced by the builder and/or designer. This is a quote from FM Global. The private building surveyor regime has led to a culture of complacency and an element of not rocking the boat or biting the hand that feeds you. The level of independence we originally had with municipal building surveyors has been lost. There you go. I'm not the only one saying it. In the face of the shift to private certification across the country since 1993, regulatory oversight of the role of private surveyors by governments around the country has been patchy. Most of the regulators we consulted advised us that proactive audits of building surveyors was not done or it only commenced in the past 3 or 4 years. Since 1993. That is insane. In most jurisdictions, to the extent that auditing is undertaken, these audits are largely administrative, although there is work presently underway to develop more substantive audit programs. So they're not auditing these people whose job it is to audit and the construction industry and approve these buildings. Wow. Intervention is rare. State licensing bodies have cancelled the registration of a relatively small number of private building surveyors in only 2 jurisdictions. In many jurisdictions, there have been very few disciplinary inquiries into the conduct of private building surveyors. I know I've made complaints about people falsely acting as architects, and nothing happened. A common complaint from local government associations around the country is that they are expected to undertake enforcement related to the poor practices of private building surveyors without being adequately resourced. They also argue that state and territory licensing bodies have been ineffective in dealing with incompetent and unprofessional practitioners. For example, the local government New South Wales has argued that the Building Professionals Board New South Wales is slow to act on non-compliance matters, requiring councils to take on greater enforcement roles. There are 2 sides to this story. From private building surveyors, we have heard that sometimes when they try to undertake enforcement and refer unresolved matters to the state, territory, or local government, they are ignored. Yep. Worse, on occasion, attention turns to their own conduct and they find themselves subject of complaint and criticism. Wow. So there's actually absolutely no incentive for self-regulation in that profession. Notwithstanding the very strongly and consistently held perception that private certification is tainted with conflicts of interest and poor practice, a range of stakeholders express sympathy for the difficult role of the private building surveyor. Yeah, I can I can appreciate exactly where they're coming from, where you've got all this responsibility that falls on your shoulder, and you also need to make sure how you're going to pay your mortgage, how you're going to keep your business going, how you're responsible for all these employees of you that are working for you. Are you going to, rock the boat and risk all of that for something that may never get caught? Many private certifiers are individuals of high integrity. They often experience considerable pressure from the conflicting demands they face from their clients, their regulators, and insurers. Too few in the building industry are attracted by a career as a surveyor. The profession is aging, and there are limited pathways or incentives for people to become building surveyors. Some of those consulted have told us that the move to private certification over the past 25 years has compounded many of the problems that we have been asked to examine. We tend to agree. However, it is not just the conduct of private building surveyors that contribute to the problems, but also the lack of regulatory oversight of their conduct, and more importantly, the absence of a cohesive and collaborative relationship between state and local government and private building surveyors. In the building and construction environment that has developed since the early 1990s, the governance of private building surveyors needs to be recalibrated. It sounds like it needs to be established. There should be a tightening of government oversight of the building approvals process in order to effectively minimize the conflict of interest that is inherent in a privatized building surveying model. Some jurisdictions are considering options such as cab rank or chocolate wheel model, in which government makes the decision on the allocation of private surveyors to projects. Some jurisdictions are considering limiting the involvement of a private certifier to issuing the building approval or conducting inspections or issuing the occupancy certificate, but not all 3. So that's probably not a bad idea. So that means that you can't have the same building certifier doing all 3 things. You'd have one doing that, one doing that, one doing that, because often you'll engage one and they'll be there in the design stage and helping you in the design process. So if 3 different ones, they'll have to reach a compromise together, and there's less risk of that conflict of interest coming through. Another model is to allow private building surveyors to perform all 3 stages of the building approvals process, but only for approvals related to domestic and low-risk commercial building work. The allocation of roles between government and private building surveyors is for each jurisdiction determined. The recommendations can be implemented regardless of the public versus private building certification model in place in any given jurisdiction. they would complement any other restrictions that a jurisdiction may wish to set in place. Our focus has been to ensure the integrity of private building surveys. We believe that can be achieved through statutory controls to mitigate conflict of interest, Recommendation 9, a code of conduct, Recommendation 10, and mandatory reporting obligations, Recommendation 11. I'm surprised those don't exist. The recommendations also call for increased collaboration between state and local governments and private surveyors in enforcement roles. Such interventions do not represent imposition of unnecessary red tape or bureaucratic overreach. There is a significant danger that without increased auditing and enforcement, the privatized building approvals process will lead to an ongoing decline in compliance standards. This is why we proposed enhanced regulatory oversight. Improved governance of private building surveyors is necessary in order to win over vocal industry critics and, crucially, to restore public confidence that safety is paramount. Okay, let's move on to the responsibilities of builders. The quality of buildings depends heavily on the competence and integrity of builders. There are many builders that have high standards of competency and integrity. However, the rate of disputes, alleged defects, and reports of high levels of illegal Phoenix activity are evidence that there are shortcomings in the performance of some builders. These need to be addressed. You know, I might actually look at this one in a separate video because I think that's an interesting topic, separate from building surveyors, that people might be interested in as a standalone one. So guys, thank you for joining me for this episode of Heiser Says. Like, share, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments. You know, I'm sure there's some building surveyors that are watching this. How do you feel about the process? What do you think about these recommended changes? Can you share stories confidentially, without naming people, of conflict of interest or where you've been pressured to do something you wouldn't enjoy or you wouldn't feel comfortable doing? Guys, thank you for joining me for this episode. Ding the bell for future updates, subscribe and like to spread the word, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.